All right, so what is this session about? We had a whole bunch of ideas about what we do here, and our basic concept here is that we're going to talk a little bit about learnings, that what we learned a little bit, and just tee up a little bit of those things, and a little bit about what we think is coming next. But what we want to do is have this be very interactive. So there's some microphones in the aisles, so if you want to ask us any question about anything we're talking about or anything else, just get up and ask it. You can interrupt us anytime. Let's make this as interactive as possible. So with that, I made a few slides. They're not very, I like Ender's slides better, by the way, but here we go. So just a little bit of a review on what is hydrogen. We've talked a lot about it, but I just want to show one slide on that. A little bit about what's already queued up for maybe what's going to be called helium. We've been trying to control what the next release is called, but we lost control of it. And then get onto the panelists and talk about what we've learned and where we're going. So I'll say a few things about both of those, and then we'll go around the panel. And while we're doing this, if you want to get up and ask a question about anything that's being said or has been said or hasn't been said, feel free. So, you know, we've seen this picture about 1 million times, but I just want to put it up there so people remember that this was where we started. I mean, with this kind of an abstract idea about what we were going to do. Ender showed a kind of a different cut through this, but really the same thing. But this is a classic picture, and this picture, I think, in the fullness of time will be classic. But you know, this is where we started. And we built a simultaneous release plan that had, and actually Ed, a lot of this was due to Ed. Ed did a fantastic job on this. And you know, if you look at this a little bit, you see that the formal release was supposed to be on December 9th. You know, like the best laid plans, a few things went wrong, but we recovered and got to where we wanted to be. And what we delivered, really, this whole community delivered, was sort of a multi-project. There are 14 projects that were in OpenDaylight in the simultaneous release, which is really phenomenal. It's amazing, really. And the project diversity was extreme and very good for the project. And we delivered a simultaneous release, and meaning that all of these things were part of the hydrogen release. We codenamed it hydrogen. We went around on this forever, but we finally, what we did was we went back to our community and asked, you know, we used tools. I think it was I don't know what kind of poll it was, but Phil helped us put up a poll, and this is what we came up with. There were some other candidates, but. And then the release date thing slipped. Okay, it slipped. But you know, for the first release of this and the first time around, and a lot of us, including me, hadn't been involved in an open source project at this scale anyway before. So I'm pretty pleased with the work that everybody did and how we got here, even though we slipped it a month or whatever it was.
Slipped 100 years.
I made these slides over. I made these slides over lunch and didn't read them. So if it only slipped 100 years, that's pretty good. And this is just a laundry list of what was in there. There's a lot of stuff in there, you know. I mean, and a diverse set of things. It's really pretty impressive. So, you know, we have a process called creation review, and we have projects that came along that want to get into the next release already. And there's a really nice idea from some folks at Cisco called application policy plugin. That one we did the creation review, and it's an incubation state. There's a life cycle. First step of that is incubation state. There's a vSwitch proposal that came from Intel. Very nice stuff. SDN simulator, that I just saw that today. Somebody wrote that in the wiki. There's a Python client, which is interesting because we need to work on language bindings. We'll see that. And then the packet cable guys did some fantastic work. They have a proposed project. So you'll see these and more in the next release, in theory. Now, what kind of things are we going to want to work on in the next year? And there's some non-technical or quasi-technical things. And this is a necessarily incomplete list that I know my colleagues here will fill in, but I wanted to just put a couple, you know, lay down a little bit of state here. Ender talked about this a little bit, continue to build and refine our community. You know, one of the things I learned over the last year is that open source artifacts are one thing, but the community is what it's about. Without the community, it's not here. And the OpenDaylight community is, you know, incredibly vibrant. And all of you are part of that. We also want to increase the committer diversity across our projects. One of the things is that in the first spin of this, as Indra pointed out, a lot of the projects were brought by companies who had already developed this code. So naturally, all of the committers were part of the project, part of the company that brought the code. But we're working on increasing that because that's a sign of health of the projects, and in particular, and the project more generally. We came up against a couple of staffing things. One is release engineering. We learned a lot about that, and we can talk about that later, but yeah, Ed learned the most. Between Ed and Chris, this has something to do with sleep deprivation, that's all I know. And documentation, right? Because the documentation is something that reflects on the quality of the project pretty deeply. We want to continue to refine our engineering systems, and where's Andrew? We couldn't have done this without Andrew. Andrew, stand up. Awesome work, Andrew. Awesome. But the bottom line is we need fewer humans in that loop. Not Andrew. Andrew can stay.
We're keeping Andrew. You can't have him.
Yeah. And we need more code that writes code. So this is what one of the things the MD cell, you've heard about the MD cell and all that stuff. And again, we need fewer humans in some loops. And of course, we need to do sustaining engineering. This is one of the things we haven't thought about a lot, but we will in the next year, which is, who does the sustaining engineering on the projects that are already here? People want to go off and do new projects and all of that. But, and Inder mentioned a few of these, performance and scalability, we are working on that already. I neglected to mention basically state consistency models, which Colin Dixon led a couple of really nice discussions. I don't know if any of you were fortunate enough to see those, but today over there. And then we'll have new projects, right? And I mentioned a few, but in the hallways this week, there were so many projects that were proposed. It was really amazing. People want to do a lot of interesting things. Okay, now, the way I thought I'd handle this is let each of you have a few minutes on, what you think are the key learnings, and then what you think the future looks like for the next release. So Ed, you want to go? And by the way, if you want to stand up and ask a question, do it anytime. Interrupt Ed if you like. It's not a problem.
Everyone does. Some of the things we learned is that we're going to have to actually find that, well, to be frank, there are certain classes of things that you cannot trust humans to do reliably. And so you want to get substantially better automation, processes for how pieces integrate together that are more robust to human error. Because one of the things that may not be obvious, people have quoted the million lines of code number, but I think we have something on the order of 250 bundles that go into the release from those 14 projects. So there's just a lot of moving parts and pieces, and we do have automation for the integration for them, but we need to make sure that we make it easier for all those pieces to continue to flock together, so that we can continue to have projects that are doing their own thing and working at their own pace, but that stay in synchronization with each other.
Very good.
No.
I want to talk about more humans involved, actually. So my reflection, this was the first open source project I've ever been involved in, and it's daunting to get started, I can tell you. Thanks very much. I think I can look around here and just smile at a lot of people who helped me and Ericsson in general get involved in the project, and what I want to see is more of that. We've had a lot of learnings in this. We know how rewarding it is. I think of all the guys in Ericsson who have jumped on board and worked in this, they just smile. They smile through sleep deprivation. It's amazing. It's a great place to work, and it's a great environment to, yeah, drugs are good. I didn't say that, cut. Anyway, I would like to see more projects. I think we're going to have a problem soon in the TSC, and that is we're going to have to approve a lot of projects. I really feel that's going to happen in the next few months, and I really want to ask the community to do that. I think Neil asked, please recruit someone. I agree. Please recruit many people. Let's build this community, and let's get more and more projects running, and use our non-human assets to help make it easier for humans to get involved.
Indeed, absolutely.
Before we go to Chris Wright, I just want to mention, I just forgot one thing. Is Luis Gomez in here anywhere?
Yeah, where is he?
Oh,
Where is he?
Definitely.
There he is.
Stand up. Luis took on the job of testing and integration for the hydrogen release, and then more generally for OpenDaylight, and without Luis, we would not have this today. So let's give him a hand. And thank you to Ericsson for loaning him to us. Go ahead, Chris.
All right. Couldn't agree more. Actually, it was one of my buzz topics in the early days of the project. I think a few things are important to this project for the success for the near term and on into the future, most of which have already been touched on. The core is absolutely the community. I've been involved in innumerable number of open source projects, and there's something that I usually refer to as the magic pixie dust of an open source project. And that's the magic that makes it successful. And to date, nobody's really figured out how to produce that magic. It's spontaneous, and it's through the collection of all of the individuals involved in a project. This project actually started off with some of the greatest open source longevity challenges, namely a very large code base dropped into a community and saying, good luck. We have a few people here to hold your hand, but really it's typically projects are much more successful when they start small and grow organically. So a big goal we have, both at Red Hat specifically and then within the project that I'm always advocating for, is how can we bring contributors in? How can we make the project accessible to new people? It's not just about writing spectacular code, it's about fostering incoming talent and that innovation that comes with that and the collaboration that's required to build this into a successful project. Another thing I think is really important is total transparency, and that's across the board. That's not just in our governance process and our development process. Everything that we do that's automatable should also be checked into a repository somewhere. And this is started in the integration project where you can see some of our testing tools. And I really look to the OpenStack project as a leader in this space of producing a tremendous amount of code that's just about their own infrastructure and their own testing. And this is an area where I think we could grow a lot, and this is a place where folks in this room are great potential assets to our project to help us with that. There's a bunch of technical things. I think we could have successes by being within our large community, being narrowly focused on very specific use cases. We have some examples of that going already. And more end user input helps us understand what the valuable use cases are that we should focus on. So, it's another form of growing the community. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Chris. Rob.
Thanks, Dave. I think Chris Price, I really like what you said, more humans. Neela at our opening keynote, I believe, asked everybody, and I think I heard now it's not 550, but there's 600 people attended the OpenDaylight Summit. So if each of you begin to contribute, we've 4x'd our contributors from the first release, which is amazing. If each of the people who contributed bring one person, we only 2x'd it. And if each of the people who are here bring one friend, we've 8x'd the number of contributors. We'd have over 1,000 contributors. I think it's important, as we've talked about and as we have those little handouts, code is the coin of the realm. But bring code, but don't just bring code. It's okay to bring a bug too. I found out how easy it was to just go into the Bugzilla system and open a bug. Number 380 is one of mine. So super easy to do. Bring a wiki edit. The OpenDaylight wiki, wiki.opendaylight.org. There's a lot of good documentation there, and anybody who is trying to run OpenDaylight can help to build out that set of documentation so that the next person can, it's like you're giving a hand to the next person to climb up that ladder. Also bring a project. And the thing about bringing a project, if you go to that same wiki, there's a getting started for users, getting started for developers, and there's a getting started for projects. So if you're thinking about bringing one, please go there and think very seriously about getting started. And I think the OVSDB project is a great example of a few folks brought a project, and then a lot of folks came together to help build that project.
Thanks. Okay, so we could do one of many things here. What I would like to do is see if we can get some interaction from you folks, since this is the TSC who works for you in some ways. So somebody get up and ask us a question.
An easy one, please.
Yeah, make it an easy one. No, go ahead.
So in the early days of SDN, I'm assuming that a lot of companies are want to try before they put SDN solution OpenDaylight in production. So I saw on the list an SDN simulator project. Could any of you expand on that or what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of brand new. And I just noticed that it was, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the folks who are proposing it actually put it under incubation when it's actually proposed. I don't know if you noticed that or not.
Oh.
You know, because you can go and look at our wiki and all that stuff's there, but basically what they want to be able to do is do different kinds of simulations than the kind you can do some right now with Mininet, right? I mean, you know, you can do some pretty extensive simulations of different kinds of network topologies, and as L2 anyway, with Mininet. So they want to expand on the set of things that you can really do. And go on the wiki it's currently listed under incubation, but it's a proposed project. And you can read their project proposal there, and it'll tell you some more detail about that.
Thanks.
Hey, you know what would be nice is like state your name and your affiliation
Right.
in case people don't know who is who.
Christos Colliers with Orange, and our office is in San Francisco. I have a question of whether you guys, what are your views on federated SDN controller? Do we need some sort of federation around SDN controllers? And since I like to draw my analysis from transportation, or it should be something like the air controller system where, you know, there is no something like a global air controller system. So do we need federation, or do leave controllers on
I
their
think
own
there's-
as you cross domain boundaries?
I think there's a pretty general view that we need controller federation. And part of what that ends up looking like depends on the kinds of problems and needs that folks would like to solve. I've talked to people who wanted to do controller federation between a couple of data centers. I've talked to some operators who operate in dozens of countries and would like to do global federation of controllers. Those are going to have somewhat different characteristics in terms of how you approach those problems, the kinds of challenges you have, the kinds of information you'd like to federate back and forth. So, you know, as we look more closely at those use cases and we start trying to solve them, those are things we're going to have to figure out going forward. But I don't know of anyone who doesn't think that controller federation is important at some level, because you are going to want to be able to coordinate in a situation where you don't have complete replication of state.
Yeah, so Ed kind of hit on the key point is that, you know, there's kind of this inter-domain controller clustering thing, and then there's the, or intra-domain and inter-domain. And federation people, I mean, you guys, you know, if you have ideas on this, but in federation, in the case of federation, people are usually talking about inter-domain state distribution and probably policy, right? And that's kind of one of the things that may be a project for Helium. And in fact, we talked about that with Colin and others today during his breakout session.
It's actually a topic that's come up within our technical community a number of times. And you know, we have these nice abstractions to communicate southbound to devices. We don't have east-west abstractions to talk to other controllers other than the internal synchronization that we're doing. I think that our first pass, from my perspective, the right way to do it is just get two instances of independent instances of OpenDaylight talking to one another before we get really grand thoughts about total interoperability, global, Skynet owning everything. But
yeah, no Skynet, okay?
It's certainly a topic that's worth investigating, and it's a great project to propose to the OpenDaylight community.
Dan Pitt, Open Networking Foundation. I'm very excited to see this many people actually writing code for software-defined networking. I think it shows that it's a movement that has got traction, so it's really a great thrill. And I have a couple of suggestions or thoughts. One is, first of all, if you, in your work, any of you and all of you encounter things that we in ONF should know about, please tell us, either through your own company's membership, if you're a member, or through some vehicle that we can set up between OpenDaylight and ONF. And the second is, I know this is very early, but the sooner we can get some feedback from deployments in your customers' accounts, the better, and we would like to get that so we can all share that, learn from that, and understand what we can all do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Sorry?
I was going to say, thank you, that would be awesome. I spent a lot of time in the OpenFlow 1.3 spec because I was working on the OpenFlow plugin, and I think there's actually a lot of good bilateral communication opportunities available because you learn entirely different things as an implementer than you do as a specifier. But you also sometimes run into situations as you're looking at problems that people who are specifying standards have thought somewhat about already. And so there's a lot to be learned there as well as you encounter new problems.
Yeah. I can add that in Ericsson, as we implemented the OpenFlow 1.3.1 plugin, and we have also additionally worked on the specification, we do use our avenues back to the ONF, and there are a number of discussions ongoing in many of the working groups now. So I think it's a healthy collaboration we have establishing, I guess.
And there's a further interesting collaboration for northbound APIs that I think
Yes.
we'll continue to talk about.
Yeah, so we can see a lot of space where we can work together. Over here somewhere. You know what? I don't have any shades, so I can't see anything.
Okay. Thanks. Hushan Kanekar, Cisco Systems. And I've seen it's great to see the code growing to a million lines of code which is out there. So this is more of not only a suggestion to the TSC, but also to an appeal to the all the developers out here. We'd like to see folks build apps and use this infrastructure code which we have out there. And that would really help us to know how good the thing is, how we can extend it, and we'll get that feedback loop. That's something what Dan Pitt was talking about, the feedback loop between OpenDaylight and ONF, within ourselves, within the projects, within the hydrogen, how good it is, what do we have here, how useful it is. Because at the end of the day, for an engineer, it's the end users when they start using your code. That becomes the biggest gratification. So, and I would like to appeal to TSC to see how we can foster that and how we can have a process in there that we don't have to go to the formal project kind of thing for that, but that should come more spontaneously. Thanks.
Thank you. Right.
We actually do, as an organization, we have an endeavor to bring end user participation into the OpenDaylight project, the umbrella project. There's a number of different ideas of how we can accomplish that, but it's a huge goal for us to be able to get that communication directly back from users. And as a developer, it's invaluable information, so bring it on.
Additionally, I think on the northbound side, application development is an excellent tool for getting involved with the project. If you think I can do something with an SDN controller, start a project. Your 20% and the community's 80% will probably make some magic happen.
Yeah.
So, Ryan Motes, IBM, also known as Regex Boy. I'm gonna ask about the four-letter word, security. Do we have any plans to get that into the controller, because it doesn't make sense to put it in as an add-on when we're all done?
Okay.
Somebody want to take a whack at that?
I'll say one thing, which I couldn't agree more. I've worked on projects as the security person where you come in and bolt it on after the fact, and it's stuff I'd really prefer to forget about. It's too painful. We do have some authorization, authentication mechanisms, but having somebody whose goal in life is to review what we've done from the eye of a security specialist would be a huge asset to this community.
Yeah, I'll just mention here is that in the SDNRG and the IRTF, when I'm the chair of that, security is a huge issue. The actual issues around SDN security are just starting to be understood. So not only could we play a pivotal role by having an implementation that people could use, but we have experience. And I would encourage anybody who wants to participate in that activity to also participate there.
Yeah, no, it would be a very welcome addition to have somebody who really takes a deep dive look at that sort of issues. But there are certain kinds of issues, that are more than just sort of the I'd like to make sure that things are not hacked kind of issues with security. And that is, as you sit here and you look at how you have multiple applications interacting with resources in the system. It's one thing to say, okay, we need to be very careful to defend against nefarious people who are trying to do us harm. But what actually really gets you is not, those folks are after you, is the people who do not wish you harm, who are trying to collaborate together and making sure you have proper enforcement of the way they interact so they don't stomp on each other in uncontrolled ways, et cetera.
So it's not security, that's application policy composition with an eye for security, which is important. Yeah, it's useful.
Yeah.
I would add a comment. The only thing I would say on security is that now we have hydrogen out the door. We have a good idea of some of the security issues we want to address, and I think as a community we will begin to, but it certainly hasn't been a focus over the last few months has been a real focus on integration and getting the code in place. But as mentioned, any activities that anyone has of interest, post them. You'll see contribution.
Just
Jeff.
Mr. Ericsson. So everyone wants to run to new projects. I would really like to encourage to look at what we've done, taking my favorite topic, BGP. How do we make it carrier grade? How do we go from 16K routes to 2 million routes? How do we provide TCP socket resiliency? We need to iron what's already done, not just take on new projects.
So there are definitely plans in terms of expanding what the BGPLS stuff is doing. Those are currently being fleshed out. People have talked about adding, right now we're just a BGP listener, adding BGP as BGP speaker. People are trying to figure out various and sundry things about MD5, et cetera. So there definitely is interest moving forward there.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit in the category of performance and scalability. You know, we
Yes.
didn't really, you know, it wasn't as if we didn't look at that, but you know, there were enough other things going on to get hydrogen done that wasn't a primary focus.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that happens at this stage in a release, right, when you're really getting a release out, and this is the most frustrating thing in the universe as a developer, is you start to develop the list in your head of the things that you know you could do better, the things that you know that aren't quite right, that aren't quite up to what you'd like them to be, and how you're going to fix them. But you have to get the release out, and then you come back and loop at them. And so like the stuff you commented at is absolutely on that list. I've actually had conversations about, we know we need to do X because of Y, a number of times this week with developers.
I'm not aware of a project that doesn't have a laundry list of things they want to improve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And I'll just mention that in the case of the BGP listener, which I think maybe you're alluding to or somebody mentioned, it wasn't really designed to take full route tables, because basically it takes like, I mean, this is a little bit technical, but it takes like 23K, which is about the size of the biggest IGP you might find, which is really what the BGP-LS thing was trying to do. But as Ed pointed out, it's people are going to expand the listener to a, you know, BGP speaker, and at that point, it's going to need to scale to the sizes that you were describing. Anything else on that? All right, who's next? Come on.
I got a question. Dave,
Okay.
I've got a question over here. Look
Okay.
the other way.
I can't see anything, by the way. It's like, you know, it's like I have shades and I forgot to bring them up here.
I'm Mark Cohn from Siena, and
Hey, Mark.
We saw in your slide a little bit earlier that a list of the projects that the members are actually contributing, but I'm curious about what is the TSC thinking about in terms of the priorities for the next release?
Excellent question.
I can have a go at that. The TSC does
Yeah.
not set the priorities for the next one. No, I shouldn't. But we don't dictate what the priorities are. We discuss and we try and gather support from the community to solve certain problems. Beyond that, I think the TSC has a duty to raise these topics and raise the discussions. We will have Hackfest where the TSC will be, of course, nominating certain topics to be raised and trying to wrangle people to help engage on certain topics. Scalability, federation was mentioned. Every project has a laundry list. There are things that we want to focus on and try and promote to be improved, but I don't see the TSC has a role to state what must be done.
Yeah, you know, Inder kind of mentioned this thing about top-down versus bottom-up, and you know, one of the many principles we've been operating the TSC on over the year has been, and this is kind of Ed's terminology, but I think it fits really well, is that resources follow interest. The TSC doesn't actually control resources, development resources. So it's you folks who are going to determine the direction that we take in helium with our guidance, of course. But you know, it's kind of bottom up. We're driving from the bottom up.
I mean, the resources follow interest is a really good point, but it's actually a much deeper point than it sort of comes across at first as. Which, I mean, we actually had that question. That's where we originally said that, was the first panel we did last year at ONS. We were asked how the TSC is going to direct resources, and the answer was, we're not. Resources follow interest. But it's actually deeper than that. We can't. Because the people who are working on the projects in the community, the organizations that employ those people, the individuals who are acting as individuals, they have things that they're working on. what we can do as a TSC, and I think we've done a reasonably good job of, is we have a pretty decent bully pulpit. So we can draw attention to things, we can point out gaps, and what we've actually seen a lot of, particularly in the last few weeks leading up to the release, is there's tremendous power in bringing focus to those gaps. The spotlight brings a lot of power because when you point them out, people rush into them very often. So in that sense, we don't get to direct things, but we can draw attention to them.
You know, we don't even have resources.
We
We have nothing.
we don't have
direct.
resources.
I can direct me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we have Ed.
It is, what Ed's saying is really important. We are here to advocate for the project. We're not here to tell the project what to do. And you know, being a conduit of information between projects is about as useful as we can be in that space.
So I want to just add something to what Chris said. You know, I said there were a couple of principles that we operated on, and this was one of them, the one we just discussed. But the other one, which is related to this, is that as a TSC, we kind of decided that one of our principles would be that we take the lightest possible touch on the projects while still trying to do the different functionality that both Ed and Chris were saying. So it's, as a principle, we stay out of the internal business of the projects. And that kind of is related to the fact that we don't direct resources.
Yeah, I mean, we actually had something recently on the TSC call. A very well-meaning project wandered in and said, hey, we're changing the way we do our internal implementation for the thing that we're doing. And it's like, well, you're still doing the thing you're doing, right? And yeah, well, awesome, that's what you said you do, and it's not our business how you do it.
Yeah, there's a bit of formality, exactly. So there's a bit of formality around that because you make a project proposal, and in that project proposal, among other things, you describe what the functionality is. You can change the way you want to implement it based on whatever the project is interested in doing, you know, and with our guidance. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm asking this question as sort of
Vijay, what are you doing out there?
Yeah. Vijay's proxy, not as a TSC member, of course. You know, I want to follow up on this point because it's something that I think we've struggled with a lot over the course of this release, which is this balance. And I know there's definitely TSC members who are all about, you know, staying out of the project's way, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but at the same time, as we get more and more content into the project and more function, I mean, there is definitely a risk of it becoming basically the Wild West and pretty chaotic without some really, you know, strong guidance and maybe suggestion, if you don't want to go beyond that, from the TSC. And I think the TSC's burden is only going to grow, you know, as we pass hydrogen in terms of making sure we look at things like security and scalability and performance that maybe no one is initially interested in working on, but are crucial things. We did that with integration and test, and I think we got good results from it, right? But you know, I think those things will get addressed, but I'm also concerned that we have a lot of new content coming, and the TSC in ramping up the project has been, as you said, very light touch in admitting projects and sort of providing guidance, but I'm just curious if you think that will change in the next cycle.
No.
Can I take a shot?
Sure.
Can I take a shot? And then I'd like to hear what you guys have. So the project lifecycle was designed with the state, we call it incubation, where projects can come along, and by the way, we're thinking about putting sort of a pre-incubation state into the lifecycle to actually make this easier. But the idea that you could incubate a project, that's what we want to do. We want to encourage all of those projects that want to incubate. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to advance along the life cycle. That is the job of the TSC. So in a way, in kind of running a project through its life cycle and our responsibilities through each of those transitions, those are the places where we can, in the current structure of things, where we can, you know, provide that guidance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the other thing. So you talked about the Wild West, and it's actually really quite interesting because as we were getting ready for the release, I think all we did as the TSC was sort of say, we have these blocking and tackling things that need to be worked out, right? And I'll just take one example because it's sort of a classic Wild West example. Our logs were utterly out of control. They were insane. We were logging packets under info level. It was nuts. And so we sort of called attention to that problem, and we called attention to that problem, and what happened from the community, not the TSC. The TSC didn't write the guidelines for log levels. That came from the community. We didn't even agree to them, actually. And they changed a little bit, bouncing back and forth as people found things where they're like, when we look at do we want to change the guidelines? Do we change the guidelines? And those things came about by consensus. And the work got done because having developed that consensus from the bottom up, nobody wanted to be that project that polluted the logs really badly. And so a whole bunch of stuff got cleaned up really quickly from the bottom up. And frankly, we could have spent weeks debating log levels in the TSC. I don't think it would have been a productive use of our time, but it's something that got really fixed precisely because it's not as Wild West as you think it is down there, right? You shine the spotlight on a problem and the community realizes, oh my God, we have this problem, and they solve it.
I think the community often will come together at the peer-to-peer level and we'll see grassroots collaboration to solve these problems. I remember a Hackfest a few months ago, and the folks that were working on the VTN project and the folks that were working on the OpenDove project were all sitting around a table together around a little white butcher paper and sketching out how the two projects could align and could work together. And I think it's, rather than potentially some sort of top-down, it's really great where we've got this grassroots, bottoms-up, peer-to-peer collaboration that I feel like we're very lucky that our community has this magic pixie dust that Ed and Chris Wright have talked about, where people want to come together and want to collaborate and want to do good stuff.
I think of a concrete example. Something that I care about is performance and scalability. And I think that if we said as a mandate for the release, soon to be known as Helium, that performance was a strict requirement, that we would be completely overstepping our bounds. We could, however, say, we have these performance issues. What do you think as a community? Hey, why don't we develop some regression tests around performance so we can monitor them, get a baseline, and then we start having a community framework for measuring ourselves and our own success. And we don't need to mandate that. We need to just facilitate and enable that.
Yeah, and transparency is hugely powerful there because engineers like metrics. And if that's something that arises from encouragement, where you can see how things are trending in terms of performance, people do things about that.
Yeah.
We really care.
Yeah, that's a good point. People really care about this project, as you can tell. So it's really nice that way, and that's part of what makes all that work. I'm sure there's somebody else who has a pointed question for us.
Why are we standing?
Go ahead.
between
Go
you and
ahead.
B?
Can you go to the mic so other people can hear you? Please.
Well, while he's going, I think there's a lot of jokes about people who are working very late or being sleep deprived, but you don't necessarily have to work the same hours on the project that Ed does. You can very much...
In fact, the chances of doing that are slim.
And deeply inadvisable.
Actually, please don't.
No.
Yeah. Go ahead, please state your name.
Maharaj from Cisco, and also an OpenDaylight developer from day one. I'm very proud to be here.
Thank you for being here.
I have a question. How do we define success at the end of 2 years, which Inder said earlier? Now we are 1 year into it. At the end of the 1 more year, are we looking at number of downloads of our OpenDaylight deliveries as a success, or number of deployments, number of customers using it? How do you define success?
I'll take a whack at that and then let my colleagues go. First off, I think number of downloads is a really misleading metric, and I prefer not to use that. What we really want to have is, as what Ender outlined in his slides, is we want people to deploy this code, build it into their products, use it in open source fashion, deploy networks, build new applications, do things that we didn't think of with it. And it's really about deployment and the utilization of the code base by both industry and by customers themselves directly. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. I don't really see that downloads, it's hard for me to understand what a download means.
Yeah, I'm going to add a little on that. I mean, there's community, there is acceptance, there is adoption. It's very hard for us to say we're successful because of any one of those three things. I think you'll talk to some people and they'll say if our community is diverse and broad and thriving, then we have been successful regardless of anyone is actually deploying it commercially. Others will be saying we need a commercial deployment in order to validate the work we're doing is actually meaningful. I'm not willing to actually put a metric on it myself. I think it's going to be a measure of all of those things, and I think it really is dependent on a thriving community. There is metric involved in adoption and acceptance of the code as it exists. And of course, all those stats you see up on the web pages about number of commits, number of downloads, all of that sort of stuff it's an indication, but I wouldn't take it to heart as a metric. To me, it's an internal feeling more than anything else.
So I mean, we were asked this question almost a year ago at ONS. You know, how will you know that you're successful? And I'm going to repeat close to verbatim what I said then, which is you don't tend to see a lot of mediumly successful open source projects. You tend to see projects that are either wildly successful or that die. And so, you know, it will be self-obvious a year from now if we're wildly successful. And all the metrics that we talk about downloads, we talk about, you know, deployments, et cetera. If nobody is deploying this, it's going to stop being interesting, right? And if nobody is downloading it, they're not going to be able to deploy it. So, you know, those things all follow. And so you sort of look around, and one of the things that we see here that honestly completely blows my mind is on a lot of these metrics, like, you know, the size of the community and the vibrancy of the community, the number of people involved, the amount of work that we've done, the breadth of things that we've worked on, vastly exceed, I think, anyone's wildest imagination when we were asked this question the first time last year at ONS. And so my suspicion is that we're going to sit here next year, and we may even be asked again about metrics of success. And where we're going to be next year is going to, once again, wildly exceed any possible thing that we think we might achieve now.
We do have some metrics, actually, that we're trying to develop so we can measure ourselves, and they are all the things everybody's mentioned. I think the one I didn't hear was a rich ecosystem, but that's kind of still on the commercial side. I just like to think of it in terms of total world domination, and it's pretty straightforward.
Don't mention Skynet, no.
Yeah.
And please,
Just shy of Skynet.
yes, votes. Chris is running for office in Oregon. You can vote for him. Rob, you have a thought?
I'm going to paraphrase something that Rajiv said as keynote, but and I apologize, Rajiv, if I don't get this exactly right, but to do great innovation requires collaboration. And I think that success for OpenDaylight will be that there is great innovation in SDN, and OpenDaylight is one of the great vehicles for collaboration in SDN.
Who's next? Are we all running out of gas at the end of the summit here? We're standing between you and beers, or what is it? Okay, well, let's see. Since we're not getting, is there anybody else who wants to have a question? Because we're going to going on that. Now's your chance. Okay, so what I think we'll do is go around the TSC members here for any final comments before we close it up. So Ed, you want to give your reflections on the year, kind of like in a 1-minute forum?
No, it's been incredible. It's been unbelievable. It, again, exceeds wildest imaginations. The one thing I do want to reiterate is that plugging in and doing things in this community is incredibly easy. Almost anyone you talk to is going to be anxious to try and help you to plug in and be able to work on the thing that interests you. And if you want to bring a project, that process is also extremely easy by intention and design, because we want to let the flowers bloom.
Nicely said. Chris?
What can I say? It has been a ride. One I didn't expect when we set out on this journey. It has been enormously fulfilling to be a part of the project. And to be even associated with the work that we've done. It's if you haven't tried it, try it. That's about the only thing I can say. It's been really fulfilling personally, and I think as a community, to see the success that we have with hydrogen going out the door.
Yeah, definitely echo that sentiment. I walked in yesterday morning really not knowing what to expect. I mean, I had seen the numbers. I knew we would have a lot of people, but the number of people wasn't what struck me. It was the enthusiasm, the energy, and the initial phase of this project encountered a tremendous amount of skepticism. And the experience I had walking in yesterday morning was just optimism and enthusiasm and excitement. And that's just such a great feeling and experience. And I'd love to keep that going and encourage people to come and contribute in any way, shape, and form. It's bugs, it's documentation, it's using it, it's developing it. So yeah, please come and join our community.
+1, bring a friend, bring code, bring a bug, bring a wiki edit, bring a project. Looking forward to seeing a lot of the folks in this room on our IRC channel soon.
So I think I'll just close this up by saying, you know, like my colleagues here, I've been really humbled to be part of this over the last year, and I thank all of you for letting me be part of it. And I really cannot describe the feeling I had, like Chris, right, when I walked in here and I saw the energy level that was here, all of you, and the enthusiasm and just the overall energy that was here was amazing. So thank you all. And for those of you who are traveling, travel safely home. And for those of you who aren't, let's go to the bar.
Agreed.
All right, so what is this session about? We had a whole bunch of ideas about what we do here. And our basic concept here is that we're going to talk a little bit about learnings, that what we learned a little bit, and just tee up a little bit of those things, and a little bit about what we think is coming next. But what we want to do is have this be very interactive. So there's some microphones in the aisles. So if you want to ask us any question about anything we're talking about or anything else, just get up and ask it. You can interrupt us anytime. Let's make this as interactive as possible. So with that, I made a few slides. They're not very, I liked Ender's slides better, by the way, but here we go. So just a little bit of a review on what is hydrogen. We've talked a lot about it, but I just want to show one slide on that. A little bit about what's already queued up for maybe what's going to be called helium. We've been trying to control what the next release is called, but we lost control of it. And then get onto the panelists and talk about what we've learned and where we're going. So I'll say a few things about both of those, and then we'll go around the panel. And while we're doing this, if you want to get up and ask a question about anything that's being said or has been said or hasn't been said. So, you know, we have a process called creation review, and we have projects that came along that want to get into the next release already. And there's a really nice idea from some folks at Cisco called application policy plugin. That one we did the creation review, and it's an incubation state. There's a life cycle. First step of that is incubation state. There's a vSwitch proposal that came from Intel. Very nice stuff. SDN simulator, that I just saw that today. Somebody wrote that in the wiki. There's a Python client, which is interesting because we need to work on language bindings. We'll see that. And then the packet cable guys did some fantastic work. They have a proposed project. So you'll see these and more in the next release, in theory. Now, what kind of things are we going to want to work on in the next year? And there's some non-technical or quasi-technical things. And this isn't necessarily an incomplete list that I know my colleagues here will fill in, but I wanted to just put a couple, lay down a little bit of state here. Ender talked about this a little bit, continue to build and refine our community. One of the things I learned over the last year is that open source artifacts are one thing, but the community is said, feel free. So, we've seen this picture about 1 million times, but I just want to put it up there so people remember that this was where we started. I mean, with this kind of an abstract idea about what we were going to do. Ender showed a kind of a different cut through this, but really the same thing. But this is a classic picture, and this picture, I think, in the fullness of time will be classic. But this is where we started. And we built a simultaneous release plan that had, and actually Ed, a lot of this was due to Ed. Ed did a fantastic job on this. And if you look at this a little bit, you see that the formal release was supposed to be on December 9th. Like the best laid plans, a few things went wrong, but we recovered and got to where we wanted to be. And what we delivered, really, this whole community delivered, was sort of a multi-project. There are 14 projects that were in OpenDaylight in the simultaneous release, which is really phenomenal. It's amazing, really. And the project diversity was what it's about. Without the community, it's not here. And the OpenDaylight community is, incredibly vibrant. And all of you are part of that. We also want to increase the committer diversity across our projects. One of the things is that in the first spin of this, as Indra pointed out, a lot of the projects were brought by companies who had already developed this code. So naturally, all of the committers were part of the project, part of the company that brought the code. But we're working on increasing that because that's a sign of health of the projects, and in particular, and the project more generally. We came up against a couple of staffing things. One is release engineering. We learned a lot about that, and we can talk about that later, but yeah, Ed learned the most. Between Ed and Chris, this has something to do with sleep deprivation, that's all I know. And documentation, right? Because the documentation is something that reflects on the quality of the project pretty deeply. We want to continue to refine our engineering systems, and where's Andrew? We couldn't have done this without Andrew. Andrew, stand up. It was extreme and very good for the project. And we delivered a simultaneous release, and meaning that all of these things were part of the hydrogen release. We codenamed it hydrogen. We went around on this forever, but we finally, what we did was we went back to our community and asked, we used the tools. I think it was I don't know what kind of poll it was, but Phil helped us put up a poll. And this is what we came up with. There were some other candidates, but, and then the release date thing slipped. Okay, it slipped. But for the first release of this and the first time around, and a lot of us, including me, hadn't been involved in an open source project at this scale anyway before. So I'm pretty pleased with the work that everybody did and how we got here, even though we slipped it a month or whatever it was.
Slipped 100 years.
I made these slides over. I made these slides over lunch and didn't read them. So if it only slipped 100 years, that's pretty good. And this is just a laundry list of what was in there. There's a lot of stuff in there, and a diverse set of things. It's really pretty impressive.